One of the most evergreen questions about belief is the relationship between religiosity, atheism, and education. It shows up in debates, troll memes, and headlines, and sometimes in quiet assumptions we make about one another. We hear claims like education makes people less religious, or that faith is independent of intelligence, or my favorite, that universities are somehow factories for atheism. But no doubt the reality is more nuanced and hopefully much more interesting than any single talking point. When researchers look at large populations, a pattern does seem to emerge. In many countries, higher levels of formal education correlate with lower levels of religious belief and affiliation. College graduates, on average, are more likely to identify as religiously unaffiliated and less likely to endorse literal interpretations of Scripture. But correlation is not causation, and education itself is not a magic solvent that dissolves faith. I've known dumb atheists and brilliant believers, but I do think that there's something at work here worth talking about. What do you have to say about it? Let us know on Talk Heathen, because the show is coming right now. All right, well, welcome everybody. Today is January 25th, 2026. I am your host, Christy Powell, and joining me today is Sidney Davis Jr.
What's
up?
Excited
to be doing this with you.
Yay! I feel like we are the always a team. I feel like every time I'm on, I'm paired with you, and I think
what you're saying is that you're like really sick of ending up stuck with me.
I wasn't going to say it, but you said it.
Right. So, all right. Well, I think that's honestly, it's a good thing because this show could use a little bit more riled upness, a little bit more debate. So let's just go ahead and start there.
I think it's the hair ratio. I think just to make the hair
that's
ratio
what it is.
Even,
you're jealous of my locks. I appreciate
That's exactly what it is.
I appreciate it. Well, I hope that everybody out there is staying warm and safe and dry during this like wild moment in our country's history, politics, weather. It's all a little bit messy at the moment. So we appreciate you joining us and spending some of your Sunday with us today. Talk Heathen is a live call-in show and we have open lines. So get your calls in at 512-991-9242 or from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. We're live like this every Sunday at 1 p.m. Central on YouTube and now on TikTok. So if you are watching us there, we're excited to have you join the conversation. We hope that you'll give us a call. You should know that Talk Heathen is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. I'd like to take a moment to thank and put up on screen some of the very dedicated people who have been working to make all of this come together this morning as we test out some new equipment, as we get live on TikTok. There's our crew cam, all of these wonderful people. We thank you very much for the frustration of everything we've been working through this morning. And with that, let's bring in our friend Aaron to talk about today's topic and to take a moment and thank him for all of his hard work with the nonprofits and Truth Wanted. Aaron, glad to have you here with us on Talk Heathen.
It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Well, appreciate you. So I mentioned it in the intro. We're kind of wading into some ticky-tacky territory, I know, in a lot of ways, because correlation is not the same as causation.
Right.
Just because we see this population trend doesn't mean I get to say that you're an idiot or you're brilliant. Like, there's nuance here that we need to be willing to take a look at.
Yeah. Sorry. Are you talking to me? You're talking to Aaron? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, really. I just kind of wanted to throw it out there before I go any further to say, like, am I onto something here? You know, is there anything that we can actually glean from these like population level questions that isn't just like shitty snobbery of, well, actually, my cherry pick statistic says that my position is correct?
Well, I would probably start by saying I like the idea that you said that it's correlation is not causation, because it could be that people that go to college are a little, maybe they have a little more open-minded or are able to be convinced. So maybe the root cause is people that actually want to go to college, not necessarily getting the education.
It's
There's
a population thing there. Yeah, into that sample.
There's either something internally to you that you want to get an education. Maybe you were raised in an environment that valued an education. So maybe that might be some kind of a root cause that would get people to say, huh, this God thing, let me actually sit down and think about this for a few minutes, you know?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so there's still a question about method of action, and I think that's definitely something we'll get into in this discussion. But we shouldn't be quick to try and find one smoking gun or like one specific factor that's driving all of this. We can't necessarily like isolate, identify, and replicate in that way.
Mm.
No, I think you just need exposure. I think we in the pre-show we were talking back and forth. Well, I was mostly listening to you guys talk back and forth, and the idea popped in my head. Somebody mentioned the word exposure. If you're exposed to new ideas, that really can have a life-altering effect on you. When you just hear new ideas, you listen to new people's experiences, people whose experiences you've never had before or seen in your life. I've heard that traveling to other countries and living in other countries can also do the same thing. This exposure to life outside of your bubble, because we all live in this little zoo, our own little zoos, right? We're all stuck in this 5-mile radius bubble that here in the United States, and leaving that bubble, you can kind of see, oh, maybe the world isn't as black and white as I thought. Maybe it's shades of gray. Maybe everything is nuanced. Maybe context is important. Maybe
Nuance.
Yeah, maybe
nuance.
Maybe there are no really. Maybe the only hard and fast rule is that there are no hard and fast rules.
No, everything's black and white. Everything. There's no such thing as gray. There's no nuance. There's you know that?
Nuance. There's no context.
No such thing.
Context isn't important at all.
No, especially not on the internet. No way.
Yeah, and sarcasm always reads clearly.
Yes.
So look, I went to a large state university, kind of famous for its like cultishness and conservatism. That was my undergraduate, and then I went to a private Christian school, if you can believe it, for my graduate work. So I'm by no means trying to make the claim that higher education like beats the Jesus out of you.
It doesn't.
Despite the fact that that's what I had been warned as a small town evangelical. For me, going away to school was invaluable in deconstructing my faith.
Yes.
Are fundamentalist parents right to worry that education will ruin their children's faith?
No, I don't think it's college, because we had colleges for a long time. People have been going to college for a long time. Maybe not as many, but college has been around for a long time, and the number of atheists has kind of not gone up. Guess when the number of atheists started to go up? Guess what that correlated with?
Hit me with it.
The internet. And the availability and the exposure to new ideas and new ways of thinking.
The devil's platform.
Yeah. People should be more scared of their kids being on the internet than they should go into college.
Fair to say, yeah.
Yeah. Who was it? I heard a quote from somebody, and maybe the chat can tell me, who said the largest threat to Christianity is the internet. Somebody recently said that. I don't remember who it was, though. I need to check my notes from the conversation that I had where that was said. But, and I think there's also a big difference between I should say, we need to clarify that we're not saying if you have an education, you're not religious. We're saying the studies show that in populations that have higher levels of education, they do have lower levels of religiosity and Christianity or evangelical beliefs. So I'm sure we'll get a call or we'll get a comment that's like, well, I have a degree and I'm a Christian. And as someone who was a Christian all the way through my own degree, as I was deconstructing, same thing. But we can't deny that the numbers show, and I've got several sources I can cite at some point through this conversation, in the areas where the education is lower and the average household income is lower, the religious beliefs or the identity as a religious person, those rates are much higher than in areas where the levels of education are higher and the levels of household income are also higher. So for anybody who wanted to get in the chat and be like, well, I have my doctorate in this and that, and I'm a religious, but we're not saying that that doesn't exist. We're saying the numbers don't lie.
Yeah. Well, so what do we imagine drives this statistical anomaly or this trend line, if we want to look
Mhm.
at it that way? I'm sure it's not a single factor, but is it education in that sort of strict formal sense of come to class and learn how to think critically, or learn about these tools, or learn about these facts? Is it So is there some sort of like waywardness or some other force that's tied to the college experience?
I mean, I would say that the same thing that interests a lot of people in seeking a higher education, the same part of their brain that makes them interested in getting higher level degrees, is the same part of the brain that makes them ask questions. And so it's not that they go to college and then they go, oh, God isn't real. I think people have traits maybe in their personality, in their brains, and their maybe mental and emotional existence that say, I'm curious about things, therefore I'm not done with school, therefore I ask a lot of questions, therefore I'm interested in learning, and that includes what I'm taught in church. So it's not the only those two things. It's not I'm getting a degree and also I'm going to question God. It's the exact same thing that makes me question things in class, and facts that I'm learning, and research I'm doing for class, and research I've done in high school, and books that I read. That is the same part of my brain that makes me go, why don't I apply those exact same questions to religion and what I'm being told in church?
Sure. Yeah. Sort of putting everything under the
Yes.
microscope and recognizing that faith is this sacred cow that we're not supposed to question, kind of by definition. Well,
Yes.
what if we did, though?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Uh, Aaron, yeah, please.
Well,
jump
I
in.
was just going to say something similar, that we kind of we only believe things that we want to believe fundamentally. Like, we have to want to believe certain things to even start to. We have to want to question. We have to want to get answers. And if you lived your whole life in a bubble that you just never had to think about it, and then suddenly you're in a place where you can start to think about that, you finally maybe give yourself permission to kind of question those things.
Yeah.
Give yourself permission to maybe want to have different answers. And maybe you've grown up in an environment where nobody ever exposed you to critical thinking or to philosophical thoughts, or is free will a real thing, or where the Bible came from. And now that you're out of that bubble and you're in a place where you can hear new things, maybe that kind of exposes, oh, maybe I want to maybe explore some of the things. And other people are like, no, I'm not really interested, because I don't really want to investigate these things.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it definitely makes sense to point to exposure to a diversity of ideas, a diversity of people, having more opportunities, more things to choose from. For myself, coming from a town of about 4,000 people, having graduated from a private Christian high school with a class of 30 people, to be on campus in the largest by landmass campus on this side of the Mississippi, it was for me also just kind of surreal being in a city. Being around so many people who are having to get along with one another and work together on a certain level.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that I was part of a Christian organization and, part of the university culture, just recognizing that the Christians in this town had to sort of coexist and get along with the university in a way that nobody really expected to or felt like they needed to in my small town, sort of opened my eyes to oh, we're expected to be tolerant of things like homosexuality? How come? What does that mean? Why? And I hate to admit it, but just being kind of shown that it's not okay to be a bigot really opened my eyes.
Yeah. I think something that did it for me, I remember very clearly, is for the first time being asked follow-up questions. When you're young and when you're in a population that everybody believes the same as you, everybody thinks the same as you, and you say this thing as a fact, everybody goes, yep. But when you're on a college campus and you say this thing as a fact, your classmate goes, why?
Cite your source.
Yeah, and you're like, huh? Wait, that's not supposed to be part of this experience. What is going on here? Why? And then you spiral a little bit, right?
Yeah, I'm always telling people citation needed, people tell me things. Well, this, and this, and this. I'm like, that doesn't pass my sniff test. I need to cite a citation on that.
Yes.
And
Yep.
yeah, a little bit of skepticism. I look back on my life and I realize that I'm kind of by nature a skeptical person.
Yes.
But I was raised a fundamentalist Mormon,
Wow.
and so you're just taught not to question all the Mormon side of things. But I can look back and see the ways I was being skeptical, but I was just ignoring my skepticism to continue to believe. Like
Yes.
in the Mormon Church, every month they have this meeting where people get up and bear their testimony on why they believe God exists, and they're beautiful stories. They're amazing spiritual stories, but some of them are like, yeah, that doesn't quite. Maybe not,
Right.
And so I can just kind of look back and see that skepticism that I unfortunately suppressed until I finally was able to say, this really doesn't make sense anymore for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the literalism. It's one thing to say, oh, this is a collection of stories meant to teach us a lesson. Okay, that makes sense, like Aesop's fables. But when somebody goes, no, literally, every human being came from the same two human beings, and two of every animal were on the ark, literally, that's when a lot of us start to go, wait, what? Literally? You mean that actually?
We stop being satisfied with but a wizard did it.
Maybe it's just a story, maybe that makes a little more sense. And it's really interesting. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You would think, and there's other scriptures that I can't pull off the top of my head where they say that truth is important. Knowing the truth is important. And universities are places where they're trying to get to the truth. They're trying to understand how the universe works, how people work, how systems work, and get to the truth of things. And so you would think that Christians and other religious believers, that what's most important is the truth, because the truth, if it's true, it will lead you to God. It will lead you to Jesus. It will lead you to religious belief. So what do we have to do? Why do we fear the truth? Why do we fear learning and education? Because if God is real, if Jesus is the Christ, if Jesus is the Savior, then everything we learn is going to lead us back to Him because it's true. And so at one point, why are you so scared of education? Why are you so scared of learning things?
Yeah. I want that to be on merch, if Jesus is the Christ.
Yeah, Jesus is the Christ. Well, that's
Jesus
a Mormon thing.
The Christ.
Jesus the Christ. They put a "the" in there for some reason.
Do?
Jesus the Christ. Yeah, there was a book.
He is his role of being the Christ, the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's
never mind. Don't put that on merch because a lot of people would buy that thinking it's actually religious.
Yeah, that's some Mormons. I don't know slang, but that's some Mormon verbiage. Yeah, for you.
Jesus T Christ here.
Yeah.
Well, so I definitely want to continue this conversation. I think there's a lot of interesting things at play, but I want to make sure to make some time for the phone calls and jump in with Mark in Toronto. So Aaron, we'll see you here in just a bit, and let's jump on with Mark. Mark, what's on your mind today?
Yes, how you guys doing?
Doing great. What can we help with?
Yeah, so I guess the question is, does critical thinking necessarily lead to atheism?
I mean, I think I would say short answer, ideally, but not necessarily. I definitely want to give more nuance on that. But Sidney, what do you think?
I think it's a situation in, not all mammals are animals, but all what's the word? There's like a phrase where they say like not all animals are mammals, but all mammals are animals or something like that.
Yeah, just looking at our Venn diagrams.
Right. I think critical thinking doesn't always lead to atheism, but the road to atheism always involves critical thinking.
Oh, I might push back on that a little bit myself. I'm very curious though. Mark, how does that sort of initial thought strike you?
Me there, Mark?
Yeah, well, while we try and get that sorted out, I guess I'll say, Sidney, that I, particularly working as a therapist in Austin, Texas, very self-selecting group of people that I'm talking to, but I can definitely say that there are a lot of folks who walked away from traditional religions because it was gross in a great number of ways, because it felt offensive to their values. And so they took that step back. and then took that same amount of energy and put it into much more wooey and nebulous forms of magical thinking and spirituality, and I don't want to say like without any critical thinking whatsoever, but not certainly applying intentional skillfulness in the ways that you and I would encourage people to do when it comes to issues of this magnitude.
Right. Do you think that people can use critical thinking skills without recognizing that's the tool that they're using, for example? Like maybe you leave the faith because it is gross in whatever way that just makes you feel bad, that makes you feel like you shouldn't be there, you don't belong, or something like that. But maybe you don't realize the thoughts that you're having might be considered critical thinking skills. Like it's less of a literary analysis of the Bible and more of the parts of your brain that are making you make those comparisons and ask those questions and feel certain ways are the same things that I don't know.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that very rarely do people, sit in their favorite thinking chair, staring out a window on a rainy day, like sipping tea or maybe a scotch, and ask themselves, like, how do I think critically about my eternal salvation? But I do think that the more we practice these skills, the more that we are trained in these skills, whether explicitly in forms of philosophy and things like that, or in much more implicit ways where somebody is just like, oh, well, here is how you cite a source in a paper. Here is how you understand academic research. That just going through the motions on those things will help so many people develop a way of reasoning that can hopefully help pull them out of things that get messy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I completely agree. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we still are working in the back end to get Mark on the line. Again, as we are streaming to TikTok for the first time and sorting through some of these things, I want to return a little bit to just talking about education, Sidney, and what that maybe means for our future as a species, for ourselves as anti-theist activists in these spaces. I guess I'm curious, should public education aim to be strictly neutral in talking about religion? I mean, if the science disproves something, I know that that's a very messy entree into this conversation, but is it enough to just teach scientific and historical methods without intervening directly in religious belief? Or how would we maybe ideally be framing all this?
If you had asked me prior to 2016, I would have said that there is room for example, when I was in high school, I took a world religions class, and we learned a little bit about each religion across the world. And there were probably 6 or 7. Obviously, we didn't touch on all of them, but we touched on the main ones. And it was very interesting. And it was more of like a literary study type situation. I do think in the last 10 years, opening the door for any form of biblically based public education might be opening the door too far. I think we've seen now the quickness, I suppose, with which that kind of education can be weaponized, or that kind of education can be turned against us. So now I say, yes, we need to stay neutral. We need to stay, take it kind of back to the 90s, when everybody liked Bill Nye the Science Guy, when everybody agreed that history was history, it seemed like in school, at least from what I could see and read and could tell. I think that if somebody wants to pursue any sort of religion in their day-to-day education, that's something that needs to be privatized and they need to do on their own, whether it's homeschooling or whether it's going to like a private Christian institution. I don't think that religion of any kind should be included in education. Now, I would say perhaps if handled correctly, there's room for mentions of what certain religions believe maybe in a history class. For example, I took a tour once when I was visiting these like ancient caves in Sedona, Arizona, and the tour guide was talking about the history, the age, this and that and the other, and he said, even though carbon dating has told us that these are this old. There are some schools of thought and some religions alive today that think that the world is only 6,000 years old, and that is something that can be explored separately. Like he just mentioned the fact that some people, modern day people, believe those things, but he didn't go into what that would look like or anything like that. And so as much as I would love to have that kind of conversation included in public education, I think for the foreseeable future, we have learned that that is a slippery slope in the United States specifically.
Yeah. No, I hear that. And I like the notion of letting facts speak for themselves, that, carbon dating is a method that is generally accepted by people who explore that field. And that evidence suggests that this cave is such and such years old, and just sort of letting the chips fall where they may. But I recognize that I specifically, when we're talking about cave tours, had experiences of going with teachers that would then debrief us afterwards and be like, that's not true. That's not true.
Yes.
I don't know what the solution for any of that is.
Yes. And actually, when I told my tour guide, because it was a very small tour, it was just me and 3 other people, I said, what do you do when you get somebody on your tour who thinks that way? And he said he has been giving the tour before when he's heard parents correcting him to their kids under their breath, being like, no, remember, because that's from the Great Flood. Like, no, remember, we talked about this. We talked about, they had basically prepared their children for the tour guide to give information that was wrong. And I think that's really twisted. And so I don't think religion belongs in education. I think if you want to pursue religion, you should either pay money to go to a religious institution, or you should save it for Sunday. You should save it for after school, just like we save many activities for after school, I was in dance as a kid. I wasn't in dance at school. I was in dance outside of school. I think there are certain things that just don't belong in public education. They either belong in private education or they don't belong involved in education at all.
Yeah, no, I hear it. And I do think that firewall needs to be certainly stronger than we see it today. Is it meaningful then to talk about education causing atheism? Or is it more accurate to say that education creates other kinds of changes, or changes the kinds of beliefs that people are willing to hold and defend?
I think education opens people to ideas that, should those ideas be attractive to them, might also lead to questioning their faith, changing their faith, deconstructing. I don't like I don't like the exact blame of, if you're educated, you're at risk of becoming an atheist. It's more the more education you expose yourself to, and the more information you expose yourself to, whether it's literally in school or on the internet after school or through moving to a different town and meeting new types of people, you're exposed to more ideas that you are welcome to explore, and that exploration might lead to atheism, as opposed to, the violent games cause violent people. It's education causes, atheism. It's no, there are many, many steps that, depending on what you are exposed to and what you're allowed to ask and what you're allowed to research and what you're given the resources for, might then also lead you to question many things, one of which is your religion. And that's exactly what happened to me. Nobody tried to make me non-religious. Nobody tried to make me an atheist. I was just exposed to things like being on the debate team and research and evidence and having to have, facts to back up what I'm saying, and sources that were considered valid. For example, Wikipedia was thrown out in debate. You weren't allowed to use the Wikipedia, use a better source. That I started to wonder, why is it that I'm required to have specific sources that are trusted, that are peer reviewed for 90% of my life, but this other 10% of my life, which is supposed to be the most important, the eternal salvation aspect, I'm told to do the opposite. So it wasn't that debate said, by the way, God's fake. Debate just said, this is what sources and evidence and reality and truth look like. And my brain went, well, that doesn't look like church. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that notion of holiness, of having our religious beliefs and our faith so totally set aside and sacred in a way where we don't question them, we don't challenge them. I appreciate that is, for many forms of faith anyway, completely inherent to the idea.
Yes.
And when you look at it from the outside, it's like, well, boy, isn't that convenient?
Yes.
You know, the one thing that we're not supposed to apply any sort of critical thinking to is also the thing that includes, you know, magical stories, and that includes seemingly impossible feats and miracles in these things.
Yes. And there's also just the general idea where if you tell children not to look into something, that's the first thing they're going to look into. So if you are a strict religious household and you tell your child, don't you dare go on Google, that's an evil place, your kid's going to go on Google so fast and they're going to start Googling stuff and they're, you know what I mean? So I think we've seen time and time again that parents that are incredibly strict in many areas, whether it's sex, whether it's drugs, whether it's religion, whatever it might be, their kids tend to be the ones that dive into that stuff first. Whereas in my house, I was never told I couldn't research things. I was never told I couldn't look things up. I was never told I couldn't ask questions. So it took me another 15 years to start asking those questions because they weren't attractive to me in any way. It took me until I was 25, 26 to be like, wait a second, let me really think about this, because it wasn't forbidden to me.
Sure.
So I think that's another angle as well. Maybe it's less about going to college makes you an atheist, and it's more about sending your kid to college after telling them what they are and are not allowed to research and what they should and should not research, and that they might be exposed to the devil when they get to college. That's going to make it a little more attractive and forbidden to them than people like me who I just believed what I believed because it was never made to be anything other than the truth.
Yeah, well, so to that end, is there a part of this conversation where we maybe should be skeptical of, you know, the small town person who has been brought up in a particular tradition, then going to the big city at like the ripe, impressionable age of 18, and for the first time being responsible for taking care of themselves and having exposure to alcohol and parties and living off of no sleep and Red Bull, and then being indoctrinated by the institutions of the state? Like, is there room for us to be concerned? Should we be at all skeptical about that possibility?
I think that anyone who thinks their child or their loved ones can be preyed upon in that way, I don't think gives enough credit to the intelligence of their loved one, as opposed to willingly influenced. For example, I remember I was a college graduate. I was already out of college when, through a church, I spent a full day prepping a food bank with people who went to my church, and we wrapped all these sandwiches and we prepped all these trays, and it was just like this really wonderful volunteer experience. And then in the van on the way back to the church, the driver was like, "Isn't God good? Didn't you see what God did today?" And my first thought was, I did that. Like, I did all that. Like, I wrapped all those sandwiches. I sliced all, like, what are you talking about? And I remember that was one of the first times where I was kind of, I was a little bit mad about the credit going to God for the first time. And I just started kind of realizing every time I work really hard and I do something, people go, "Oh, God is good, isn't he?" And so I think it was, and that was at church with a church organization, you know, that wasn't with my druggy friends or anything like that.
You're listening to your intuition in a way that I know I at least was very specifically told not to. That if you have that sensation of pride, that you are supposed to cast that out. That is the devil inside of you. All glory should be going to God, right?
Yes, and that, I think, is something else that happens to people. They have moments like that where they go, "Oh, but I did that," and then they go, "Oh my God, there it is. There's
I shouldn't
the
be
devil.
thinking this way."
Yep, there's the devil. They told me this would be hard, and here it is.
They told me the devil was beautiful. Yeah, it's a very real concern. Yeah. Well, so most of the statistics that we've been looking at, and really everything that we are sort of driving these inferences on, come from very population level information.
Yes.
What should any of this mean for people's individual choices? You know, does this mean that we ought to be encouraging our kids to get a college education, even if they've already identified that they want to pursue a field that doesn't require or maybe benefit from a 4-year degree? Are there other choices that we should or should not be making when it comes to, I suppose, our children's indoctrination, education, exploration of the world? I don't know. Does this information guide us, or maybe ought it guide us as we're pursuing these questions with our family?
I think anyone who does not want their children to pursue education, or maybe your kid is going into an industry that doesn't necessarily require a degree, but you don't want them to ever leave home. You don't want them to ever leave your hometown or where they were raised. I think those people should question themselves. I think there's questions to be asked to them. Why wouldn't you want your child to explore the world? Why wouldn't you want your child to go out and meet different kinds of people? Because in my opinion, if your faith is strong and if your faith is steadfast, would it not be able to weather having neighbors from a different country, or, an Indian restaurant at the end of the block or something like that? But I think even if you're somebody who you say, I'm going to go into a blue collar position, I don't need to go to college, I don't need a higher education, I would encourage anyone, whether they're religious or not, to move and to explore, or at least to travel and to meet different kinds of people and engage in different kinds of environments and try the East Coast, the West Coast, the Southern East, the Southern West. There's no harm, in my opinion, that can come from meeting different types of people, different types of ideas, different types of ideology. Whether or not it leads to atheism, I'm not trying to convert people to atheism, but I am trying to bestow upon people what I learned and what I'm so grateful for, how different of a person I am today because I went different places and I met different people, and I feel more intelligent because of it. I feel like I've been humbled more often because of it. I'm wrong more often because of it. I've had to wrestle with those feelings of being openly wrong before. And so even if at the end of the day you still say I'm a Christian, even though I've met all these people, I highly recommend that obviously it's a place of privilege, but I highly recommend that if you have the opportunity, even if it's just online, even if it's just on YouTube, even if it's just on forums, explore as many different kinds of thoughts and ideas. One of my favorite things to do is subscribe to Reddit pages that are the complete opposite of what I think, because it gives me a little insight on what they're saying. And it makes me think, what would I say if somebody asked me this question, or if somebody made this statement in person to my face? And that alone is just such an eye-opening experience. So I hope that answers your question. Regardless of what status you are in socioeconomically, do your best to expose yourself to as many different types of people and ideas and ideologies as possible, so that at least you know why yours is the best one for you.
Right. Yeah. So I think you are very much approaching this with the idea that if your religious beliefs, if your personal values, if your morality, if anything, any of these things can be destroyed or maybe just reshaped by fact and reason and critical thinking, then more's the better, that we should allow for that. And I don't mean to keep regurgitating the same, talking point or the same idea, but to me, that is just so antithetical to the nature of faith.
Yes.
The assumption, the starting place is that this is perfect and we're not going to question it, that we're supposed to keep it as the sacred cow, and that if it is destroyed by facts and reason, then that's not really facts and reason. That's the devil. That's, Satan. That's the evil force. That's the evil power tempting you, perverting your mind, these kinds of things. I was very much taught the notion that if you analyze the Bible and you come out with atheism, that's not you analyzing the Bible. That's the devil corrupting your mind.
Yes.
I don't know. How do we even respond to that? How do people who have that mindset engage with a conversation like the one you and I are having right now?
I think, so say, for example, you are a person in that situation where everyone around you is saying, questioning this is the devil, questioning this, it hurts, God's feelings. I've heard some, but that might sound ridiculous to some people, but I have heard some.
Oh, I was told that. I've probably said shit like that. Yeah.
Yes. I think maybe I like to think, and I remember thinking this when I was a Christian, if I truly have a personal relationship with God, and if God truly loves me like a father, then he wouldn't mind me doing some research to help strengthen my belief in him. He
Mhm.
wouldn't mind the idea that I'm curious about him. I want to learn about him. I want to find these reasons. And with these reasons, tell other people why his way is the truth and the light, right? The more research I do and the more answers I find, might lead me closer to God and closer to Jesus. And why wouldn't he want that? Why wouldn't he want me prepared to have these conversations with non-believers and have answers that really make them think? But in reality, if your pastor or your parents or your whoever is in your congregation is stopping you from doing those things, maybe they don't trust your walk. Maybe they don't trust your ability to not be convinced. Maybe they don't trust you. And I would question that. I would say, what is it about me that makes my loved ones think I am so gullible that I would just trip and fall and stumble into atheism? So, and if that's the case, did they do the research themselves and get very scared by what they found and then turtle back into their Christianity and decide to stop everybody else from doing what they did? We see a lot of these fundamentalist families like the Duggars who tell their kids, yeah, we held hands before marriage and we kissed before marriage and we feel sad about it. That's why we don't let you do it. Right. And so at what point are you basically being not only manipulated, but not given the opportunity to make your own ideas and assumptions and do your own homework? And that's when people start secretly doing all the stuff they're told not to do, as opposed to if they'd been welcome to, if their pastor had been like, these are great questions, I would love to have these conversations with you. You might not be driven to deep dive into such recesses of the internet. You might stay a little more, mainstream because people were allowing you to ask those questions.
Mhm.
So I feel like there's so many different reasons why being discouraged from learning would be bad, even if you stayed a Christian after doing that homework. Even if you decided at the end of the day you're more comfortable still believing in the Bible, why would everybody around you not trust you enough to make that decision on your own? What is it about you that tells them you can't be trusted?
Yeah, that the right choice is one that you are able to make. And if it isn't, then I think that we can maybe suggest it wasn't the right choice.
Or it's not faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's not real faith if you're not allowed the opportunity to be challenged in any way.
Sure. Yeah. Dogma. Yeah. Well, so how do we responsibly interpret these sort of large scale trends without stereotyping people, or forcing a simple narrative? I would hate for anybody to walk away from this conversation being like, well, actually, it's been proven that atheists are more intelligent or educated or whatever the hell else.
I think one of the benefits to being a non-religious person is nuance. I tell people all the time, I feel more respectful of Christians and their beliefs since no longer being a Christian than I did as a Christian. I remember when I was a Baptist, I used to judge Methodists, I used to judge Lutherans, I used to judge Catholics as the wrong type or not the real type.
Right.
And I think as an atheist, because I have no skin in the game, because it does not impact me at all what you believe or what you think, you being the general you, I think there is less of a likelihood for me to agree with that statement with such a no, actually, this is always the case. I'm more likely to look at the nuance there. For example, some of my best friends have multiple doctorate degrees and are religious people. And so I am much more likely to have a conversation with them about how it is that they can still be religious with such high education, with higher education than I have, and leave with nuance as opposed to, oh, I see. So basically, if you're stupid, you're religious. If you're dumb, if you're not,
right?
Because that's not true. Anybody who has deconstructed and opened themselves up to different ideas has hopefully also opened themselves up to the nuance that is involved in all of these thought processes and all of these ways of thinking, basically. And I know there's even atheists who don't believe the same things that I believe, or they're more spiritual than I am. But the nuance is important. I don't know. Do you agree, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, just this notion that we are supposed to engage in these things with nuance, and that we're not applying critical thinking if we cherry pick a particular statistical narrative
Right.
and then dramatically over apply that, try to use it as our douchebag, mic drop kind of moment.
Yes.
That's just not how sophisticated people communicate with each other or work to better understand complicated, sophisticated ideas.
Yeah, and proselytizing for atheism is still proselytizing.
Sure.
Or judging people and acting the same way that we don't like being treated by religious people is making us just as bad as them. So when you catch yourself doing the same behavior, but like for the other side, I don't think that makes it better. I think it makes it just as bad. It's just a different poison.
Sure. Yeah, I hear that. Yeah. Well, again, when we look at these things from a very that 10,000 foot view, we do seem to see that younger generations are showing reduced rates of religiosity. There's also been a steady and general increase in levels of education around the world. What do you imagine for the future? Can we pack it up? Do we need to do an 11th season of Talk Heathen? Are we done?
I think there's definitely a correlation between access to the internet and communication and the lack of religious belief. As much as people like to crap on apps like TikTok and things like that, I think apps like TikTok have done a really wonderful job of connecting us to people just like us that we didn't know existed beforehand. And, with every side of the internet, there's the side that's, dumb pranksters doing mean pranks or like girls dancing and things like that. But there's also something that I've noticed, and maybe it's my algorithm, is women talking a lot more. Something that's been the conversation a lot on some of these critique channels that critique online internet content and drama is women are starting to post videos engaging with their husbands and in the comments learning, hey girl, your husband's an asshole. Hey girl, like that's not normal. Whereas they went, haha, isn't this so cute? Thousands of women going, no, that's not cute.
Right.
And they didn't have that platform before because when you're on Facebook, you friend people you know. So everybody knows him.
Right.
It's his mom, it's his sister, it's his cousin, it's your friends, it's the people you went to school with. Maybe you met in elementary school or high school. And so when you put yourself, you're used to that bubble. Same
the value
thing,
of talking to strangers.
Now you're talking to strangers who have, again, no skin in the game. They have no reason to lie to you or to be extra mean to you. And they say, no, that's not cute. Right. And we're seeing this happen in so many different areas where people are starting to realize, oh, the way that my family treats me, or the way that my town does things, or the way that my church does things, or the way that I was raised isn't normal. Or they're starting to think I'm alone in whatever it is I'm thinking about. And people on TikTok are going, no, you're not. I was where you were 10 years ago. This is where I'm at now. You can do it. You can get out of whatever it is you're struggling with. And so I think younger kids and Gen Z and Gen Alpha, what's going on with them is they're living in a world where these conversations have always happened because they've always had these apps and they've always had these platforms. And they're looking at millennials and Gen X and boomers and going, how are you guys so small-minded? It's right here. All you have to do is search keywords and the information, but it hasn't always been that way. And so I do think we will see a deconstruction of religion. And I think what we'll also see, and we're seeing it now, is people who are still religious, but they don't identify with Christianity. For example, my friend Tim Whitaker, who runs the New Evangelicals, he is a Christian, and we still align on so many of the same thoughts and ideas, politically, socially, all these different ideas we share the same. The only thing we disagree about is maybe where we came from, or maybe, what happens to us after we die. And that is a prime example of nuance being so important. I could look at him and go, oh, the word evangelical, ew, no thanks. When what he's doing is he's taking the word evangelical and he's reclaiming it and he's doing something else with it. And he's saying, if you don't believe that people deserve rights, if you don't believe that, then you're not following what the Bible clearly tells you should be doing. So I think we'll see a lot more of that too. A lot more of, instead of you have 4 to pick from, it's going to be you have 30 to pick from. And you might create your own. There might be a 31st where you're like, I'm going to take a little bit of each one of these social or political or religious systems, and I'm going to hole myself up in this one, and I'm going to find my friends on the internet who agree, and we're going to build our own little thing over here.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting idea, because I have sort of long been curious about the role of literacy and increased access to education actually creating maybe a stricter, more fundamentalist adherence to the Bible in particular, as people are like now able to read it for themselves. And there's this expectation that if faith comes from hearing the word of God, then I need to be in a weekly Bible study. I need to like see the words for myself rather than have it interpreted through a priest who's telling me what is what. And I think for hundreds of years, that definitely did create maybe a more like rigid notion or more fundamentalist notion of interpreting the Bible. And maybe we're on the other side of that. And a continued increase in like scientific literacy can create a little bit more flexibility as the God virus continues to like evolve and metastasize in these different ways.
And do you mind if I ask you some questions?
Yeah, please.
Cool. So what was it for you? Do you remember the first moments where you were like, Because it sounds like you were in an even more religious upbringing than I was in. And I was in a pretty religious upbringing. What was it for you that finally made you go, something's off, something's weird here?
Yeah, there were dozens of things, to be clear. There's definitely not any one thing that I can identify. But when I think back on that time, it just felt like I was pulling on these little threads everywhere. A huge part of it was certainly being at university and being exposed to other belief systems, but honestly, much more significantly, other types of Christianity. Yeah. Christians that weren't homophobic, Christians that were willing to be a little bit more interpretive and curious. And I was told not to judge them either, not to be bigoted towards them. But if I'm accepting them, then how is that okay? Because they're not doing what the Bible very specifically and literally says to do. I was very much brought up to read the Bible incredibly literally and directly, and to rely on the Holy Spirit to tell me how to interpret it. But the Bible was meant to be inerrant. And now here I am debating with other Christians about things that God definitely very directly and plainly said are evil. That was a big part of it for me. Another big part of it was just having the academic skill set to be able to recognize the inconsistencies in this supposedly inerrant book. To be able to recognize that the Bible is self-contradictory required a certain, reading comprehension, for lack of a better term, that I certainly didn't have in middle school, high school.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think when you're told that something is totally infallible, and then you find even a microcosm of a question, it unravels the whole thing. As opposed to, oh, there's nuance here. And you're like, oh, that's an example of the nuance. It's no, there is nothing wrong with this text right here. And you find something wrong. And then you think to yourself, well, if that can be wrong, can more of it be wrong?
I mean, for me, like the tiniest little thread that just unraveled over the course of a couple of years was just around numbers. How can David's army have 20 men in it and 200 men in it at the same time? Like, if God doesn't make mistakes, then did somebody leave a zero out of this manuscript? What are we doing?
Right. One of my favorite examples to tell of the literalism falling apart is I have a friend whose YouTube channel is Godless Granny. Shout out to Godless Granny. She was a literalist her whole life. We're talking, I think she said 40 years, when one day she lived near a pig farm and it smelled really bad on the pig farm, and they could smell it even though it was like a mile or two away. They could smell it. It was like choking every day. And one day her son asked her, how did they survive on the ark with all that methane, all those farts? And she's like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, we step outside a mile away and we can barely breathe, and it's just pigs. If he had 2 of every animal on that ark, how did they breathe with all those farts? And that was enough for her to be like, whoa, if that's a great question. And if I can question that, what else can I question? And then just spiraled from there. And And then, I was raised in a household where there was room for interpretation. And what I asked myself was, if there's nuance to some of this, why is other parts of it more important? Like, why is it that we can interpret all these verses except specific ones? What is
Right.
it?
Yeah.
What is it about those verses that are send you to hell, but the other verses that are, well, it depends on your relationship with Christ?
We can get tattoos and we can wear, mixed fabrics, but we certainly can't allow homosexuality. Like,
Right.
why did we highlight that specific verse or
Yes.
those half dozen verses?
Yes.
Why are we so insistent about sort of interpreting this kind of vague language about women in leadership, and how do we apply that today? What level of leadership is socially acceptable? And we're having all of these sort of nuanced debates while completely dismissing all of these ideas of, loving and supporting the stranger, of caring for widows and the sick and elderly and the orphans and all of these kinds of things.
Right. And the women in leadership was actually one of the main ones that really triggered my deconstruction. I didn't know that at the time that that's what was happening. But I remember being in the college level Sunday school group, and they separated the girls from the boys for one of the classes. And this girl who, 19, has been married for a year, therefore she can talk to us about marriage because she's, that's how it works in the Baptist church. She was teaching us about submitting to our husbands and women shouldn't lead and blah, blah, blah. And I raised my hand and I said, what's the difference between preaching and what you're doing? And I wasn't being sarcastic. I genuinely thought she might be able to tell me some insightful information.
Yeah.
And she, she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you're sitting at the front of the room facing us, teaching all of us women about how to better be Christian women and what parts of the Bible we should read if we want to make sure we're reading our instructions as women. Importantly, what's the difference between that and what the preacher does? And I immediately clocked that was a bad thing to have asked. I immediately clocked that was the wrong question. And so what is the difference? I still to date don't know, because I don't think there is a difference. And then you think, these other churches that have female leadership, are all those people going to hell? Are they doing it wrong? I remember my mom said, if you tell your friend about Jesus and he becomes a Christian and he makes it to heaven, do you think Jesus is going to turn him away at the gate because a girl led him there? Or do you think he's going to be welcomed in because your heart and your spirit did the right thing? And those were the first questions that I remember thinking, like, would God turn my best friend Malcolm from 6th grade away at the gates because I told Malcolm how to get there?
Mm-hmm.
Great question, Boy,
and how dare I bring my own moral reasoning, my own emotional thinking into any of this? Woof.
Mm. That's what women do, man. We bring emotions into everything.
Yeah. Well, so if we are acknowledging that there's some connection between this willingness to question things and critical thinking and coming to different ideas than we were raised with, and maybe reductions in religion over time, what should we make of the current cultural devaluing and all of the political disparagement that we see towards academia? I mean, I think that universities are under assault in this country now in a way that they haven't been certainly in hundreds of years.
Right. I think it is a large scale version of what we were talking about earlier. I think there are people in positions of leadership that say, I want my subjects to act a certain way, to think a certain way, to react a certain way, to trust me, to believe me, to hear my words, and to just take that at face value. And they also know that in order to do that, they have to limit those subjects' exposure to alternative ideas, to research, to higher education. They've seen the same numbers we've seen. They've done the same research we've done. They've seen the correlation between education, intelligence, religiosity, belief in structured religions. And I think they, in the same way that we are taking that information and we are saying, go to school, learn, diversify, they're saying, don't go to school, don't learn, don't diversify. They're saying the schools we don't like are the ones you can't trust. And here's a list of them. The schools we do like are the ones you can trust. And they're using the exact same data that we're looking at in a different way. And I think that's just more evidence to suggest that our data is correct. The more that they weaponize the exact same data that we are trying to use to, for lack of a better word, save people, right? They are using that exact same data and those exact same trends to say, okay, here's what we need to do in order to make sure our people go nowhere, in order to make sure they believe us always, in order to make sure that they aren't exposed to ideas that might start them thinking about things we don't want them thinking about.
Yeah. I have to just take a quick moment to acknowledge how uncomfortable it is for me to acknowledge that, you know what, maybe my dad was right about me going to college and how he shouldn't have let me do it.
Yep. And I think there's also an opportunity for us to think, if the exact same information can be used for us or against us, how do we decide which side has our best interests in mind?
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think that I can give people that tool and say, I trust you to come up with the same, I trust you to do what's right for yourself. I trust you to take that question and go, man, I don't know, is it the control freaks, or are they trying to control me from doing the wrong thing? Or is it the people saying, I don't know, try it out and see what you think? Which ones are the dangerous ones? And the scary part about wanting the best for people is having to give them that steering wheel. If they're having their steering wheel taken away, that's a bad thing. Even if they're having their steering wheel taken away from people who believe they're doing the best for them, it's, I've heard, I don't have kids, but I've heard that one of the hardest parts about being a parent is when your kids grow up and you have to let them make decisions on their own. I think we have to, as the people who want them to learn, who want them to grow, who want them to think critically, who want them to expose themselves to ideas, we have to then say, here's the steering wheel. I can't drive it for you because then I'm going against exactly what I'm preaching to you, versus the other people who go, no, you don't want that steering wheel. It'll take you bad places.
Yeah, and I appreciate the challenge there. As a parent who is currently teaching a 17-year-old how to drive, it is a little bit scary handing over that steering wheel and having to acknowledge that, like, yes, I trust you to take control of your own life as much as I would like to do it myself in this moment.
Yes.
I recognize that when you're behind the wheel, I can only give advice. And if I am telling you exactly what to do, no, you must turn the wheel to exactly 34 degrees. Like, we're never going to get anywhere. It's never going to work. You have to be able to rely on your own instincts, and you have to be willing to relax, even if maybe I'm not demonstrating the most calmness right now.
Yeah. And I think also there's a big difference between letting them know your personal experience versus controlling them with your personal experience. We gave the example earlier of parents who are like, I kissed before I was married and I had sex before I was married and I really regretted it and it's bad, so you're not allowed to do it. Versus what I hope that I would do if I had kids is be like, look, here's what I did and here's what happened when I did that. Obviously, I can't stop you from doing those things, but trust me when I say it was a bad time. And I'm telling you this because I don't want you to experience that bad of a time. If you experience it and you have a bad time, please come to me. I'm here as a resource to talk about it, but please also don't do it. I'm begging you not to do it. I'm begging you, I'm not going to take away. I'm not going to cut you off if you choose to do these things, but I am going to say, remember what I told you. I told you this was going to happen. Like, what are you? I have tried to keep you from experiencing the same bad time.
Yeah. My kid is in the very surreal position of hearing me say, like, these are the choices that I made and the effects that I had and the experiences I had, and maybe I'd recommend you do otherwise. When I tell him that I got married as a conservative Christian virgin, and he's like, really? You wouldn't recommend I do that? And I'm like, yeah, kid, maybe experience a little bit of life in those ways.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so we're taking this to some fun and wild places. I want to bring Aaron back into this conversation and see what he has to say about it all. While we're getting him loaded up, I do want to also thank our top 5 patrons. Once again, we have Oops All Singularity, Dingleberry Jackson, Clevy Helvetti, Scott, and Casey Kickendall in the number 5 spot. Our honorable mention this week is Andrew Murdoch. Thank you to everyone who gives to us on Patreon. If you want to hear your name read on air, please consider supporting us at tiny.cc/PatreonTH. Aaron, thank you for helping us today and for being backup. What do you think of the conversation? Is there anything that you might want to add in here? Oh, and Aaron, I've got you muted.
You guys won. We won. No calls, no pushback. We wrap it up. We're done.
We're done. We're done. Atheism wins. Yeah.
Atheism has won. Sorry, Christians. Nobody called in. Nobody called in to defend what you believe and why God exists. So we're left to no other conclusion than just we won.
We actually blocked all the calls because they can't speak the truth on this platform. We don't want to hear the truth. We blocked them. They called in mass and we blocked them.
What? We're manipulating the world around us to get the conclusion that we want? What? Why would anybody do that? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, we're certainly excited to be now simulcasting on TikTok and to invite in that part of our audience. We are, I suppose, still going back to the drawing board or sorting out some of the technical details of doing that process. So we definitely do invite your calls in the future.
Absolutely.
But yeah, maybe for now, we did it, guys.
No, next week we need to do an episode on how atheism won. Maybe we'll get some calls there.
Yeah, I think that might bring some folks
because we won, because we're the best. Feel free to call in and just whine about it.
All right. Well, Aaron, was there anything we messed up? Is there anything that we need to fix or set to right before we send out some love rings to our TikTok audience, to everybody dealing with the winter storm?
I think you guys did a great job. It was a great conversation, and I encourage anybody out there listening that doesn't believe what we're saying, that believes that God exists, please call in. Let's talk. Let's have a conversation.
Fair to say. Yeah. Well, again, everybody on TikTok, everybody who is living through the winter storm, any other love rings that y'all want to send out tonight?
Anybody, everybody going through what's happening in Minnesota.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, I was about to say the same thing. Love rings to Minnesota, absolutely. All the love rings we can.
To our country in general. Best of luck to everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us on Talk Heathen. We do want to say again that if you don't believe, this is your community, and we really appreciate you being here. And if you do believe, we certainly don't hate you. We're just not convinced.
We're just not convinced.
We want the truth. So watch Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Call 512-991-9242 or visit tiny.cc/call TW.